like a 3, 5, 6, 8 hour total exposure times in previous projects. So I thought if I did like a 60-hour beast of a project, then a 20-hour routine single panel image would be like nothing by comparison. And so far, my plan worked. And so I did this 4-panel mosaic of the Sator region in the Hubble Palette SHO. And so let's take a look here. Here's the final product. It's about 48 megapixels. It was 53, but I had to crop a bunch out due to misalignments in the panels between master frames. I do deconvolution in H-alpha and also a star halo removal in the O3 frame as part of the main bullet points of this walkthrough. So I'll spend about 15 minutes or so tops just to overview my equipment, the image acquisition, and some pre-processing steps. And then I'll spend upwards of an hour on the post-processing details, the mosaic composition of the 3 filters, deconvolution of H-alpha, and halo and diffraction artifact removal, only in the O3 master. And then we'll have time for some Q&A. So I use Explore Scientific ED80 with 0.8x Orion focal reducer, giving me an effective 384 millimeter focal length, which stops my f6 down to f4.8. I'm using the ZWO ASI 1600 mm Pro with the filter wheel set, LRGB SHO. I'm using the Orion Alt-Az EQ Atlas Pro mount for my equatorial mount system. I'm using a 60 millimeter achromatic guide scope at f4. It works pretty well for both my reflectors and my refractor, so I haven't had any problems with that. And the ASI 120 MCS color guide camera, which I also use as a planetary imaging camera on my Dobsonian. The ZWO filters are 36 millimeter diameter and 7 nanometer band pass. And other resources I need was coffee and maybe a beer too. And then software I used was PhD2 for guiding, Nina, which Linda actually it convinced me to finally try out and use, and I've loved it ever since. And of course, PixInsight. So here's my rig on the left, but what I should have used is this 4 telescope rig. It's like some giant beast of a rig, all using the exact same refractors and same cameras. That would definitely give me a 4-panel mosaic, well, I guess 4 times quicker than I got mine, if you could only figure out a way to very fine-tune the alignment between these 4 systems on the same rig. That would be pretty sweet to have. So here are all the dates at the top that I imaged. June, there were a lot of clear nights in July, some of the shortest freaking nights of the year, of course. So it was slow going. I probably would have finished this in half the time if Cygnus just so happened to be a winter target. So I was imaging under like 5.5 hour nights and battling the clouds. So I took 245-minute exposures at unity gain in H-alpha, and everything was cooled to negative 15 Celsius. I had to bin the O3 and S2. They're just so dim. So I binned them 2 by 2. It kept the gain the same just because I didn't want to have to retake my darks, because I already had these bin 2 by 2 gain 139 a dark library set up at minus 15 Celsius. But I had to take 10-minute exposures for O3, and I took 120 of those, and 173 exposures at 7 minutes apiece for sulfur, also bin. So a total of just over 60 hours, 533 frames. It took me 3 months to finish the project, and on one night, Soika and I frantically threw all of our gear into our cars as a thunderstorm popped up out of nowhere. It started pouring rain and lightning and really windy, just as we started rolling home at 3 a.m. And the very next night, actually, I brought steaks. I had cooked some steaks. We usually have snacks, but usually you think of a snack like out under the dark skies in the mountains as like cheese and crackers. But I didn't have any cheese and crackers. I had some steaks. And I also forgot to bring a fork and knife. But at least I didn't forget my telescope gear. Not a single adapter was left behind. So we ended up eating steaks with our bare hands out in the middle of nowhere at like 3 a.m. And I bet it would have been quite a sight to see if someone had strolled up and saw a bunch of goofballs with thousands of dollars worth of gear under cloudy skies, no less, eating steak with their bare hands. So it's just sort of a funny mental image there. I took 30 darks for each of my frames, but I was a rebel. Look at this. I took no flats, no bias, no dark flats, because with narrowband, I found that I could actually get away without flats. As long as I keep my filters clean and hermetically sealed, I don't have any dust motes to worry about. And DBE and ABE do a nice job of flattening it out a little bit for me. So I captured from my neighbor's front yard next door because I don't have a sky in my front yard, near GMU in Fairfax. Thank you, Scott, for letting me use your yard. Bortle Sky 8, 9, probably even more because there's street lights that provide direct illumination. Thank you, Fairfax County and Virginia Department of Energy, for the lighting. I didn't really need a headlamp, but caused some problems with my imaging. And about 15% of my data in total is captured from Sky Meadow State Park with Soika and our stakes, a Bortle dark sky scale of about 4 to 5. It used to be darker, but now there's a prominent light dome from the Nova DC area that illuminates the park a little bit, but still a great spot. I love telescopius.com. It's a great tool for planning and looking at pictures and stuff, and you could sort of put up a framing mosaic superposition on the sky and rotate it real easily. And so this is the framing I went with. But the only downside is you can download the coordinates of the center of each of these panels, but it's in a spreadsheet form that I can't imagine ports into every single image capture softwares. And so I had to use Nina's framing planning tool, where you can pull up coordinates on the NASA Sky Survey and choose a 2x2 panel mosaic and put in your camera and camera specs and telescope specs in there. And then you just click add as sequence target, and it exports a file that you can later import later and on subsequent nights in order to do your image capture sequencing. So in general, we have for H alpha, S2, and O3 separately, a whole stack of subs for panels 1 through 4. So you have to sort of look at the overall organizational structure. Panel 1 subs are calibrated using weighted batch preprocessing in PixInsight. You could just as well use Deep Sky Stacker if you want, and then you'll get a master panel 1. And do that for panel 2 and 3 and 4 separately, and you get your stacked calibrated final image for each panel for each filter. And then you take each of these panels and do some very initial post-process, that should say initial post-processing, like deconvolution, denoising, ABE, DBE. Actually, deconvolution should not be on that list because I only do deconvolution after I've stitched them all together. So I apologize for that typo. But despite my greatest efforts, the panels still had a minor frame rotation with respect to one another. You'll see shortly. And so I should consider getting that Nightcrawler rotator. I think Linda has it. And I could definitely use it, although I think it would be too heavy for my little itty-bitty refractor and ZWO combo. I'll talk to Linda about that later, and whoever else might have one. So post-processing, initial steps. Remove dark edges from the master lights with dynamic crop. Zap any gradients because I didn't take flats. Gently apply a multi-scale linear transform on the linear data just to touch up any noise that might be popping out, and then do a masked deconvolution. So those are the initial steps for post-processing. And then mosaic stitching, details to follow. I'll use star alignment twice, once to create a rough mosaic for each filter, and then an intermediate panel situated in the full mosaic's eventual field, and then compose the final mosaic with gradient merge mosaic. The final steps are to align all three master mosaics using default star alignment settings. Run the star halo removal routine, which I'll show later, only on the O3 master mosaic. Combine the stretched master mosaics into an SHO to RGB image. Generate and apply color masks to RGB image and run a series of curve transformations. Morphological transformation for star erosion, and then some finishing touches. And then I'm going to also introduce what you've probably already heard about, the Topaz Labs AI routine for denoising. I love it. That's the short summary of that AI denoising program. Okay, so let's get right into the mosaic composition portion. So I first I have to load up the images into the weighted batch pre-processing. I like to add my darks in and use Winsorized Sigma clipping with Sigma low and high 3 and 3. Then I load in my lights, and I'm going to generate drizzle data. It comes in handy shortly. Make sure you check the use master dark and bias and flats if you have them, and then choose your output directory, and you just hit go. Well, first you go to image integration and check the Sigma low and high clipping thresholds. I like 3.3 and 2.7. Only once in my life so far have I actually needed to change them. I was getting some white speckles, and I was like, what in the world? And so I changed the Sigma high, and it reran this, and it got rid of the speckles. So after you hit OK, it will first measure the SNR, full width, half max, and eccentricity of each frame one by one, which takes some time. Then it'll assign each frame a weighting percentage based on how good it is. Then it'll calibrate each frame like usual. Then it will align and generate drizzle data, which takes some more time. Then it'll stack, and you'll have your master frame. I have 240 subs just for H alpha. 4 panels times 3 filters is 12 master frames, about an hour each. So let me show you something. So here's a list of things you can do while waiting for PixInsight to finish stacking hundreds of frames. You can read inside PixInsight, maybe not the whole book, but most of it. You could bake 8 cakes. You could watch Harry Potter and then cook a big lunch, eat it, and then take a nap. You could ride a bike 180 miles. You can wash 6 loads of laundry. You could drive to Ashburn, hang out with a friend, get groceries, and then drive back home. You can knit a sweater, medium, 36 long. And you can also impatiently keep checking to see if it's done yet. If any of you are thinking, why are some of them colored blue? Well, those are the ones I actually did.
I was going to ask if we could see the sweater.
Yeah. So it's a good thing I clarified. Okay, so Astronomy Tools is a great resource. This is how I check to see if I'm undersampled or not. And with my Unity binning and the reducer and all this stuff, I am slightly undersampled. You can see at the bottom, I'm just going out of the green and getting into the yellow portions. To the right is very bad, very undersampled, and you kind of want to be in the green region, where to the left is too oversampled. But because oxygen and sulfur are so dim, I had no choice. Well, I did have a choice to change my gain, but like I said, I didn't want to have to redo my dark library, so I just binned 2 by 2 after increasing the exposure times to get good enough exposure to stack without an empty image error. But this led to significant undersampling. But there is a neat tool that NASA invented called Drizzle. It's actually a mathematical algorithm involving interpolated integration to recover great detail. You simply have to make sure you generate drizzle data in your initial stacking, and then open Drizzle integration and load the DRZX or something files. And if you bend 2 by 2, change the scale factor to 2 because it'll upscale it by that amount. If you are doing Unity, like unbend data, but it's undersampled, you still could benefit from drizzling, but just keep the scale factor at 1. And then you just keep everything default and hit apply global and look at the results. On the right are fuzzy, boxy, pixelated stars from my this is stacked data, the final stacked integration. And on the left is after drizzle. You get smooth, round. I mean, this is quite dramatic. This could be the poster child for drizzle, like an advertisement on the power and amazing benefit you get from drizzling. And this is zoomed way in as well. As if you can look at the little scroll bars, they're very small. As I zoomed way in on this huge master frame. Okay, so an overview of mosaic stitching. So we'll use star alignment twice, and then gradient merge mosaic for the final composition, and then we'll look for any pinch stars and modify those parameters to make sure everything's clean. So here is just the linear stacked image of panel 1 for H alpha before I've done any mosaic composition. It's drizzled. This is the drizzle integration output. Panel 1, panel 2, my favorite, panel 3, and panel 4 with the crescent. And then you'll repeat this for oxygen and sulfur. And so you'll have a total of 12 master stacked, or I should say 12 stacked stacked frames for each panel and each filter. So begin the composition of mosaic. So you want to change the working mode of star alignment to register/union-mosaic. And then you're going to load in panel 1, my drizzled integrated panel 1 for H alpha. And I'm going to choose my favorite star detection parameters and star matching parameters, whatever you put up on your fridge. For this module, those parameters, your favorite, load them in here. And then you're going to drag and drop the instance of this module onto panel 2. So you load panel 1 as a reference image, and you drag and drop onto panel 2. And you get like this. Don't worry, it looks bad at this stage. I wouldn't put something that looks like this on Astrobin or even Reddit. And so it's just all part of the process. And then you're going to load in what just was generated. It's called drizzle underscore integration underscore panel 2 underscore mosaic. So you load that file in, and then you drag and drop onto panel 3, and you get this. Then you'll load that panel 3 mosaic into as a reference image, and then drag and drop this instance of star alignment onto panel 4, and it just stitches it into the ever-growing mosaic, like a snowball effect. And you get this, and you can see what I was talking about earlier with my misaligned a rotation angle between the 4 panels. And try as I might to prevent that, I couldn't get it. I couldn't get it to not produce this this effect. It's only, I think, about 2 or 3 degrees, but it cost me 5 megapixels at the end. Anyway, so you want to save this, even though it looks like a quilt, a picnic quilt, something you might stitch while waiting for the stacking to finish. You want to rename it as Rough Mosaic, or whatever you want to name it. I like to call it Rough Mosaic because we're going to recall this shortly. And now we can prepare for what are called the intermediate mosaic panels. So you actually load, there's a lot going on here, but let me direct your attention to the top right where we have the star alignment module. We load in the rough mosaic we just created as a reference image and change the working mode now to register union-separate. instead of Mosaic. Make it the separate one from that working mode drop-down box. And then your star detection and star matching parameters like usual. But now I'm going to draw a preview box around the bottom of panel 1 inside the rough Mosaic. And we're still in the linear space right now. And this tells PixInsight where to look in order to do the star alignment. I found that it could do it without this, but it's a lot quicker if you give it a clue as to where to look. And then you'll draw a similar preview box around the same sort of region on your panel 1, just your standalone panel 1 file sitting there. So you draw those two preview boxes, and then you drag and drop the rough Mosaic inside the star alignment module onto panel 1. And here's the result. It gives you a bunch of dark area in the overall Mosaic frame, and panel 1 is situated exactly where it needs to be for it to be part of the final Mosaic. So I actually saved this to disk as panel 1B. The B just tells me it's the intermediate step. You can call it whatever you want. That's just the naming system I use. And so it also spits out a copy of the rough Mosaic. You can close that. You don't need to save it. It's just something that star alignment does. Then you load in, again, your rough Mosaic, or it should already be there if you don't close out of the module. And by drawing a preview box around the top of panel 2 in the rough Mosaic and the corresponding location in the standalone panel 2, like we did before, and drag and drop onto that. And you get this result. Again, save it to disk. I saved it as panel 2B. And then I chose the left side of panel 3 to stitch it together with the first two. And just for brevity's sake, I'll just sort of skip to the end of this process. You just keep repeating this. So you should have 4 files that are saved as panel 1, 2, 3, and 4B. And they are just that panel by itself in the exact spot that it needs to be in the overall eventual Mosaic. All right, so now it gets really cool. You open up Gradient Merge Mosaic. We're done with star alignment. And you change the type of combination from average to overlay. And you load in those intermediate files that have the B appended to their name. And there you go. Look, it doesn't look like a quilt anymore. You don't see any obvious lines or seams. But there are if you zoom in, you could see these stars have this weird like dark patch, and the one side of the star is like sort of pinched, and they're just, I guess they're just called pinch stars. And you got to make sure you look through the whole image and zoom way in. You'll get burned. I burned myself by not realizing this. And I started, doing curves transformations and histogram transformations like there was no tomorrow, and got a result I really liked. And I was like, wait a minute, this looks really weird. And I was like, oh, darn. So I had to go all the way back, and you just change the shrink radius and feather radius. Just increase them just by a bunch and see what happens, and just try it 2 or 3 different ways till you get it nice. So you rerun the Gradient Merge Mosaic still without any seams, but now that those same exact 2 stars I showed you a minute ago are now nice as they should be, and no weird artifacts, no pinch stars. And so you're done. It took all.
Hey, John, can I ask one question here?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And I'm sorry, I had to dial back in by phone because whatever I did, I destroyed my microphone, not turned it off. There doesn't seem to be any way to turn it back on, so I just dialed in by phone. The type of combination, you've picked overlay here, and it sticks. I've only done this once, and it was like a year ago. But it sticks in my head that in addition to the shrink and feather radius, there was the other option for type of combination was one of the questions that had to be decided as well, and that could change the result. Oh. And right off the top of my head, I can't even remember what it was.
So I don't recall a third one here. I actually where's PixInsight? Yeah. So I didn't recall a third option. It might have changed in one of the updates, but just super quickly, let me see if it has a third one.
Well, it's the drop-down arrow next to overlay. There's a different mode there for the combination. yeah, I'm just popping up PixInsight on my end too, and I can't remember what it is, but that I think that's what it was. And there was some discussion I remember reading at the time between whether you should use overlay or whether you should use whatever that other one, oh yeah, average, yeah. So average versus overlay. And I read conflicting views on what to do. And in the end, of course, tested them out and found the one that worked best for me. But it was interesting. It's like everything else in processing in general and in PixInsight in particular. There doesn't seem to be one path forward. There are possible paths forward. You get to figure out which one is the one that would actually work best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always multiple different ways to do these processing, so appreciate you mentioning that. Overlay worked for me, and changed these radius parameters and got some pretty good results. There's also another way.
I had to mess with the radius parameters exactly the way you did before finding one that gave the best result.
Yeah, there's
a compromise. Mm-hmm. Like, it would give the best result on star A, but something else, of course, would give the best result on star B.
Yeah.
So dealing with the pinches and the squeezes at various places, I think in the end, what I might have done was done it two different ways, and then in Photoshop, with masks, picked, okay, I'll take the left-hand side of this image, and then I'll paint in the right-hand side of that image to make it work. But yeah, I definitely remember there was some messing with those radius figures.
Yeah, there's actually a third thing you can do. If Try As You Might and Gradient Merge Mosaic works on most stars, but you have just one star left that is not being fixed, what you can do is use pixel math to actually cut it out like a cookie cutter. You make a little square shape around that problem star in one of the panels, because there's that common region. It's usually going to be in the common region between where two panels overlap, and you just remove it. Just say you're kicked out of here. Cut it out like a cookie cutter with pixel math. Then when you run Gradient Merge Mosaic, there's only one star in that location. Is the one you didn't cut out, and then it's no longer showing artifacts. And that's actually a full detail shown on that website called Light Vortex Astronomy. He's got a great walkthrough on this as well, with that cookie cutter method for really problematic stars. Okay, so here's the master mosaic after for S2 after gradient merge. Here is for H alpha and for O3. And the next thing I want to do is go back to the regular, like the default working mode of star alignment and align all three of the master mosaics relative to one another so I can start composing my color image. And so I do that, and then I use dynamic crop to cut out uncommon areas. I lost 5 million pixels doing this. It wouldn't have been as severe if I didn't have rotation problems in panel 3. You could see that big area I had to cut out at the top. And then I was dithering. I know dither or die, but I was still dithering. I saw a little bit of streaking, not 100% sure what caused that. I use multi-scale median transform sort of in an ad hoc manner. There's no rhyme to my reason or method to the madness. I just sort of punch in a few layers and just go real soft. I don't be too aggressive, and apply it, and it seemed to zap the sort of streaky background noise, so that's sort of how I do that. I know there are volumes of books on, the theory and the pedagogy, if you will, on denoising, and there's a million different points of view and schools of thought, different modules on how to do it. I just sort of shoot from the hip and say, hey, looks better, let's move on. If any artifacts pop up that shows I over denoise, then I play with the parameters a little bit. Here's a different region in O3 that I can show you the before and after. It's very subtle. I don't know if you could see that on your screen, but it's definitely a lot smoother after. And then for the H alpha master mosaic, I did yet a different sequence of layers and amplitudes for my denoising, and it just sort of softened up a little bit. And now we do the deconvolution. I know that there is, well, Randy brought to my attention that there is a script that does the dynamic PSF, because that's what I'm about to show you, getting your synthetic star that you need to run the deconvolution. But I am kind of old-fashioned, I guess. I like to just do it manually and have control over all the steps in the process. In the process. So what I do is I clone my image, my mosaic, just drag and drop. Pardon me. And then I do a permanent stretch, because you want to do the deconvolution in linear space, but you need it to be stretched permanently in order to get the synthetic star. So I do a stretch, and then I open up Dynamic PSF, and you just select a whole bunch of stars. And by a whole bunch, it could be 197 like I have, or even more. And it's spread out over the whole image, not just panel 2 that I show here zoomed in. Just sort of evenly spread out over the whole image, and make sure this column A, which stands for amplitude in the dynamic PSF module, doesn't show values less than 0.7 or greater than 0.95, because if it gets too close to 1, or if it equals 1, then your star is it's like a saturated star, oversaturated, and the amplitude has been clipped at the peak, or else you're going to create a synthetic star that is not an accurate representation of your of the stars in your image. And if it's 0.7, there's bad statistics. So you want that sweet spot. I just picked a lot of stars that are in the 0.8 range, and after clicking for about 57 times, you start sort of getting an eye for it. You can just look and be, oh, I bet you that's a 0.85 star, and you click and you say, oh, cool, I was right, and it becomes like a game. And it only takes about 10 minutes or 5 or 10 minutes to get them all selected. And then you just hit this camera looking button, and it pops out a star. It's a synthetic star. Don't worry if it looks pixelated or fuzzy or crummy. You just minimize it, iconize it, and you might even save it, so in case something crashes or whatever, you don't have to re-click every star again. So then I exaggerate the contrast. I want to make the darks darker and the brights brighter, because this is going to be a luminosity mask for my mask deconvolution routine. I just grab histogram transformation or curves and just exaggerate it to a point that you normally wouldn't go if you were doing serious processing on your final image. Just exaggerate the heck out of it. You want to de-emphasize the darks and emphasize the brights. On your cloned image, the one that's been stretched, and then you iconize you rename it. I rename it Decon Mask, the one that I just exaggerated, and then you make a star mask. And I usually bump up the noise threshold a little bit. I bump up the scale to 6 from 5, because that includes some of the brighter stars. And I bump down the small scale to 0, because then I can get more of these very numerous plethora of tiny stars. I bring the smoothness down, and then the midtones. It's something I just found recently. The midtones in mask pre-processing, I bump it down to 0.35 or 0.4, and it gives just a lot better results, I found. So you make the star mask and iconize it. And then you open up deconvolution and go to the external PSF tab at the top right and load in your PSF that you made from dynamic PSF. Make sure your algorithm is set to regularized Richardson-Lucy. It's just like it's just the canonical algorithm to use for this. And it covers like the vast majority of cases you'll come across. And then you want to load in the star mask under de-ringing local support. That's where your star mask goes, and make sure you've checked local D-ringing as well. And you're going to select a very small, teeny tiny preview because it's computationally intensive, and you just want to fine-tune your parameters before you apply it to a giant mosaic. So I choose something with a lot of fine detail. So I chose this. One of my favorite parts of the whole picture is this little column of dust pointing downwards with some really tenuous filaments. And so you just draw a teeny tiny preview box around it and change the iterations to from the default of 10, bump it up to 20, 30, 40. I've seen people go as high as 200 if you have really good data. And then you want to change your global dark, increasing it by a tiny amount so that you don't get raccoon eyes around your stars that are really annoying. And if you're not really careful in this stage, then you could end up with a final picture that has little raccoon dark rings around the stars, and it looks really bad. And then you want to change global bright so that you don't get wormy structures. In the brighter areas, you'll have sort of like an over-processed, muddled look where the sort of fine filamentary structures, fingerling structures get sort of over processed and they start looking like little worms, and it looks artificial. It's just sort of an eyesore, in my opinion, and most people's opinion. And I usually don't mess with the denoising sort of wavelets down here. I didn't really see what it was doing, so I just keep them at default. And so I ended up with 47 iterations. So you could almost see some worm. This is before, this is after, if you could sort of see the difference. And then you just hit Control Z like 10 times in a row to go back and forth, and try to see with your eyes the fine differences. And you just do that until you get the sort of what you're happy with in terms of the iteration number, global dark, and global bright. And I can see some much better detail being popping out of here. And you'll see the stars sort of sharpen up a little bit too, especially the small ones. And this one was pretty dramatic. I tried it. So the advice I have is to try 2 or 3 different little previews around different types of features, things with an even mix of light and dark and filamentary fine details. Look at the difference here. Here's the Crescent Nebula, before and after. Pay attention to these 3 bright stars that make sort of a triangle in here. They get smaller after. See that? So it shrinks down the brighter stars, it sharpens the really small ones, and you can see even the filamentary structure sharpening up before, after. And so it was a win for me. So I went with 47 iterations, and so then I applied it to the whole image, and I got rid of my previews and just let it run. It took forever. I read a book or did some dishes. And then after you've ran your deconvolution, you want to permanently stretch all 3 master mosaic files, which have been co-registered, so they all have the _R, so you can overlay them later and they will perfectly match up. So I do a permanent stretch to H alpha, to S2, and lastly O3. And so everything after this point is considered post-processing, except for maybe the decon that I did. Decon is Acon's little brother. I'm kidding. Okay, so now we're ready. So we've done the mosaic stitching. I've shown you how I personally do the deconvolution. Now we're going to get to star halo removal. So the steps are twofold. Model the halo, then remove the halo. That's about all it is. Easier said than done. So I actually have more than just a halo. If you go around this bright star Satyr that appears in panel 2, you'll notice some square-like features and then a pesky halo from my O3 filter, which is all too common. And so the ASI 1600 Pro has a known optical artifact that, much to my chagrin, sort of like a pet peeve, people all over Cloudy Nights and other forums are calling it microlensing. It's the ASI 1600 microlensing. This is a misnomer. It's not microlens. It is a type of diffraction though, but it's Fresnel diffraction. It's a microlensing that term itself, microlensing, is a term that's already taken, and it refers to an exoplanet using the background, bending the background light of the parent star through a gravitational lensing event to that scientists use to discover exoplanets. One of the many methods. So this is this is the Talbot effect, not microlensing. And I just wanted to flash two slides before your eyes on a Wikipedia page about the Talbot effect, which is a diffraction phenomenon in which you have light, a plane wave of light incident upon a periodic diffraction grating, and you have a thin film diffraction event taking place on the outer surface of the viewing window. That protective transparent window right in front of your sensor has I think it has some sort of AR coating that is super thin, and it acts as a diffraction grating. And here are some equations. I'm a theoretical astrophysicist with a heavy emphasis on mathematics, so I had to put this in here. I won't spend much time on it. And the Fresnel diffraction integrals here. I actually planned on showing you the derivation and going through it step by step, but I'm actually not going to do that. It's really interesting stuff, though. So my Fresnel diffraction pattern is very minor overall, as you saw on that snippet of the Cloudy Nights forum, where it was quite dramatic, and you have these complex circles and arcs superposed on each other in a fractal-like pattern. Mine just sort of looks like a square. There actually are regions of brighter patches, however, but they're relatively minor. The halo itself is due to off-axis refraction and internal reflections through the filter. The halo is an artifact determined by the wavelength of light and the thickness of the filter, as well as the presence of AR coatings and other filter features. And that's why typically you only see them on the O3 filter or in any of the LRGB filters, because those are letting in so much more light, and especially if you're imaging a bright star, they'll show up in those filters. But typically with narrowband, they usually only show up on the O3 filter for those optical reasons. Now we want to get rid of this halo, but there's this there are actually two squares on top of that, and you want to work from the outside inward, sort of like sweeping the steps. If you have a staircase and you're a kid and your parents are saying, hey, go sweep it, always start from the top and go down. I learned the hard way by sweeping from the bottom going up, and sweeping the bottom step 17 times, or however many steps there were in total. Start from the outside, work your way in. And what you do is, as carefully as possible, find the XY coordinates of the left, right, top, and bottom of the outer square. If you need to, I would recommend cloning the image and stretching the heck out of it with a curves and or histogram transformation to exaggerate the presence, to brighten the presence of the square and darken the background space. But I found it pretty easy to find the coordinates and write them down in a spreadsheet. You need to get organized for this part. The left, the right, you just use your cursor to find the coordinates, X and Y for left, right, top, and bottom, and you write those down. And then you do the same thing for the halo itself, left, right, bottom, top, and write those down. So now you're going to create two tiny preview boxes, one inside and one just outside but adjacent to the outer square. And the idea is to compute the difference in intensity, L, between the halo and the, quote, empty space between stars just off the square. Now, in principle, all you have to do is subtract these two, and the difference is what you have to set as your intensity when you model the square. So when you subtract it, you're left with an intensity level that's equal to the background, and so the square is gone, right? But remember, the Fresnel diffraction pattern creates dark and bright patches. So, and since we're trying to avoid including stars, the preview box has to be small. So inevitably, you're going to be either right on top of a brighter patch or right in between some. And because my Fresnel diffraction pattern just so happened to be relatively easy to work with and relatively uniform, which is typically a good thing, it hurts me here because I can't know for sure if I'm on a bright patch where there was constructive interference or a darker patch where there's destructive interference. So you just do the best you can. You open up statistics. And what I'm about to show you is a little bit of a convoluted roundabout way of doing it. And I invite you to try my method out or try whatever works for you better. But I measure the median values of each preview box in the normalized and 12-bit value number spaces, and I write those numbers down. I need the 12-bit and the normalized for both previews. And well, the reason is because I tried just the naive approach and just subtracted the just regular 12-bit values of the two preview boxes intensity, their medians. And when I applied the subtraction that I'll show you later, it did not correct for this square artifact. It didn't, not even at all, not even close. So I found that I had to play with the numbers, and it would require too much trial and error. And then I found that the intensity value that worked was very close to the square of the difference in intensity values in normalized space. But it wasn't actually the square, it was actually the product of the fractional value with the 12-bit median value put into fractional form by just dividing that median value by the total bit depth. And so when you do that, so here's just a sort of a disclaimer. The most important part here that I want to get across is you just need the intensity value to be sufficient so that you subtract the square off. And you would think it's just that difference between the two preview boxes, but because I couldn't get that to work, you could either use trial and error and just forget about measuring the median value of the preview boxes, just type something in and subtract it and see if it worked. And after 2 or 3 iterations, you should be done zeroing in on it. But I wanted to present something to you that's a little bit more quantifiable. And so what I did was I took the normalized median values for the brighter and darker patches and wrote this what I call fractional value, which is just the difference between those two values. And then the 12-bit one, 2309 and 1539, subtracted and then divided by the total pixel depth available to you. And then I multiplied those two values, the 0.18803 times the 0.18799, and I got a scale factor of 0.03535. And just a quick side note, I also wrote down the coordinates as XL for the left-hand side of the square, XR for the right, YT and YB for the top and bottom. So I just have those coordinate values on hand. And then I have the scale factor, and I'm ready to go. This equation here at the top is what we're going to put into PixInsight, and it is the equation for a square in computer language. It's if x is greater than or equal to this value and less than or equal to its right-hand side, and the y coordinate is less than that and greater than that, you've just defined a square. And the little I here is the intensity value that we want, and $T means if the pixel does not satisfy these conditions, then just keep the same value that's already there. And so this is just basic logic. For these conditions, change the pixel to this I value. If not, keep it the same. And so we take the product of these two values. I know it's sort of like voodoo here, like why am I multiplying them? I had some conversations with Randy, and in the interest of time and to avoid going down a rabbit hole of pixel fractional values that would probably take me days or weeks, I just did what worked for me. And as long as you understand, you're just trying to find the appropriate scale factor that gives you the intensity needed to subtract that square out, that's really all it comes in That's all it boils down to. So in addition to this conditional if statement equation on the left, you'll also need a list of your parameters. So what is XL? What is XR? And your intensity value. And you just write those, make sure it's in a single cell. Don't separate them into different cells of their own, because it comes in handy later. So you'll write this exact equation by just copy and pasting it into Pixel Math. And so I highly recommend using Excel or some spreadsheet to get organized and write down all your values. So what you're going to do now, after you've gone through the rabbit hole of what intensity value you need, you go to Image and click New. Or you could also just hit Control N on your keyboard if it's a PC. And it opens up this new image module. I also open up Dynamic Crop, but not to crop anything. It gives me the exact image dimensions. I'm sure there's a more reasonable, sensible way of getting those exact dimensions, and I just type those numbers into the width and height of this new image I'm making, and then give it a name, something that makes sense. So I called my new image Square Model. So and so after I do that, make sure you're in grayscale space if that's what you're working in, and keep everything else default. And it makes a completely blank image. It's just a black image with the exact dimensions you need. And then you open up Pixel Math and paste in that conditional statement that defines a square. And then in the symbols, you paste in your all the model parameters that you've determined from your spreadsheet, including the pesky intensity value. And so you just paste that into there, and then you check replace target image, and you apply it, and look what happens. You get a square with the right intensity or shade of gray that you need to model the square halo thing. So we could actually turn this into a really complicated version of Etch-a-Sketch. If you know the equations for what you want to draw, like those little childhood toys where you have the two knobs, you can actually draw pictures on here. But that would be not necessary to do. But this square is too sharp, so you want to open up convolution, which I've never used before, but it has its uses. So I increased the standard deviation value a bit. 4.2 sounded fine. You could use 3.8 or 5 or whatever. And it turns out the amount of convolution does not matter too much. You could use just a rough value and get a good result. So I don't know if you could see that, but it's now a little bit softer after I've applied that convolution to my square model. So now we're done. We have our square model. We're going to open up Pixel Math and load in your O3 image and just subtract the square model. And I chose replace target image. Watch what it does. Boom, gone. You see that? Before, after. It's just gone. It's beautiful. I love it. So now we can move on to the inner square, which I didn't even see until after I subtracted the outer square. There's this tiny square. You can really only see it in the corners, and it's almost tangent to this circular halo at every point except for the bottom. And so you just grab those coordinate values for the top, bottom, left, and right, and notice on the bottom it's actually not coincident. It doesn't tangentially touch the halo, the circular halo. So I had to be careful with that. And you should already have all the infrastructure in place, like with Square One. Compute the scale factor with your preview box statistics analysis. Write down the coordinates for the edges. Create a new blank image. Use Pixel Math to create a sharp square, and then convolve it a little for blurring. And when you do that, you'll have a new square model, and you can subtract it. See that? Before and after. There was a square hiding there that you almost couldn't see. Before, after. So now we've worked our way from outside in, and we just have the halo left. And it's the same process, only we'll have a new equation. Instead of the equation of a square, we'll have a circle. And so you should have already gotten the coordinates of the left, right, top, and bottom of the halo. But here's the trick, or here's an additional thing. You want to also get the coordinates for Satyr itself, the actual star hiding amid all that mess. You want to find the left, right, top, and bottom coordinates of the star itself because we want to protect it. And if it's really hard for you to see, just do a curves transformation on a clone in order to like bring that contrast out better. And you can get the coordinates of the Satyr star itself and make your preview boxes and all that jazz. So now we're going to make the equation of a circle inside Pixelmath. R equals the square root of x minus the center quantity squared plus y minus the center y quantity squared. And then if the radius is less than that rm value, then you use the pixel intensity I. And if it doesn't satisfy that condition, you use the pixel value that's already there. So that way it's only affecting the halo region. And you'll have your symbols defined at the bottom. The radius, the mean radius rather, r is just the variable we're using to define the halo. Rm is the actual size of the radius. Cx and Cy are the coordinates for the center. And then we have our intensity value. So I just made a little halo. Rather, at this point, it's just a circle. But we want to. So you have to make two. You have to make two circular models and subtract them to get the donut shape. You want to remove the coordinates of the star itself, Satyr, so that we can make a mask that protects it. And so here are the equations on the bottom left for the center of the circle. You just add the left and right coordinates and divide by 2, or the top and bottom coordinates and divide by 2. And so you'll have all the numbers you need in here for the halo, and then the star itself, which is essentially just another halo-looking mask that will subtract from the halo model itself, so we could protect Satyr. And when you do that, I don't know, you could barely see it. There's a little halo here with the center removed. That's where Satyr goes. And this is after I've made the main halo and subtracted the inner halo, which is Satyr itself. It's not really a halo, but I just called it that. And I brightened it just a little bit. Maybe I should have brightened it a little bit more, actually, so you could see it better. And so you have this donut-shaped mask with a dim intensity. And then you run a convolution on it. It gets much more blurry. It's a little blurry donut-shaped model of a halo. And I called it Halo Total Model because it's after I've done the star subtraction. So there we go. So I'm going to subtract this from my O3 with the squares already subtracted out. Watch this. Boom! It's gone. Halo, no halo. Now, I went really soft on it. My philosophy is to be very gentle and not overdo it. I might have been able to get away with increasing the I value a little bit, and in order to remove a little bit more of the halo, but I found that there was a little bit of the diffraction pattern left over from the squares, and if you try to zap those out, then you start getting dark patches where you've overcorrected. And so because of the presence of some remaining brighter patches where the squares used to be, my halo can't be subtracted all the way down to the darkness of space off the diffraction region, just off here between stars. So it's still a little bit of a remnants there, but that's good. It's just a matter of chiseling it away a little bit and making it better. So here's the grand total before and after with two squares and the halo. Here's before and after. Yes, the frame moves a little bit, but you can see the squares and the halo. And now I've cleaned it all up. And so this winter, you can just have at it with the Horsehead Nebula and not worry at all about that pesky, super bright Alnitak, because now you can remove the halos. And so I've also used Clone Stamp to clean up a little bit of the artifacts. I don't think I have a before and after, but there are just a little bit of some ring-like features in here, and I just sort of Clone Stamp those out of there. And now here's Sulfur 2. The halo and diffraction pattern is much more complex. The Fresnel diffraction pattern for Sulfur is not something I cover in this walkthrough because I just didn't bother attempting it. Maybe a different walkthrough I'll do in the future if I want to be subjecting myself to more of this this sort of headache-inducing halo and diffraction pattern removal. But these look sort of like hyperbolas. And so if I can have an equation for a family of hyperbolas, I could actually do a diffraction pattern removal on this sulfur panel. Well, let's move on. So I'm hearing some clicking, like someone's trying to do Morse code. If you could unmute your microphone for me, please. Thank you. So we're going to do an overview of the post-processing. So we're going to do curves transformations before channel combination. I'm going to use pixel math to get the color image, and I'm going to make color masks, curves transformations with the color masks, star reduction, and then this new AI denoising. So I have my H alpha, and I'm going to apply the curves transformation that you see on the right, and here's the after. Before, after. Just sort of made the contrast enhance a bit more and brought out the midtones and the brighter features. I love it. It looks a lot better. And now for S2, I just did it very gently. Before, after, before, after. Here is for oxygen. Before, after. There's a little bit of like a haziness that I wasn't sure was real signal or not, so I just sort of brought down the darker regions a little bit and enhanced the contrast. So here's the color image. The first time in this whole talk we have seen a final, well, an initial full color image. And so you get the typical magenta colors from you get the greens and magentas that we can remove pretty easily. So I like to go to Script, Utilities, Color Mask, and make a green mask that looks like this, a cyan color mask that looks like that, and I'm going to, you could also make a magenta mask and then get rid of the magenta, but I like to just invert the image. You could also just hit Control-I, and it makes it look all psychedelic. All the magentas become green and all the greens become magentas. And so wherever it's green is magenta. So we open up SCNR and hit it with the green channel noise reduction. And I used a 0.73 of strength because I wanted to keep a little bit of it. You don't want to completely wipe out a color. And when you do that, you see the color green has been diminished. And then you just invert back, and here you go. So the magentas are gone, and we are left with the greens and blues and a lot of other work to do. So I'm going to apply the green mask and bring the green down a lot so I can get rid of the greens, and bring the reds, blues, and the luminosity up, because you lose a little bit of brightness when you pull down the green, so you just sort of compensate, bring the luminosity up, and here is the before, and here's the after. Before, after. If you look on the bottom left, you'll see the green around the butterfly nebula region has been diminished. Before, after. Okay, then I'm going to apply the cyan mask and bring the green curve down slightly, and then the red, blue, and luminosity up, but it's a much smaller effect. And then I'm going to make a range mask. This is one of my favorite and most used tools, and I'm going to try to reduce the blue in the background. See on the sort of on the right side of the image, there's just too much blue hanging out and sort of deep space where there's not a lot going on. I just want to bring that down a little bit. So I make a range mask that selects those dimmer parts of the image on the right. And I apply it, and here's the before, after. There's still blue, but if you look on the bottom right, it's most dramatic down there. I just sort of zapped a little bit of that blue that was hanging out. And then I'm going to make a range mask for the brighter nebulosity parts by bringing the upper limit on the slider bar down a little bit till it looks about right, and apply that. Here's what I've masked out. And then I do a luminosity and a blue, the blue-yellow conjugate color curves adjustment. And so when you do that, you get, and it's just very gentle. Like you could barely even tell the blue-green, or sorry, the blue-gold curves I ran on it. Here's the before, and here's after. It just really sort of brightened up and brought out the brighter patches, enhancing my dynamic range. And now I want to use an A, C, D, and R to zap some of the color noise. So I've zoomed way in to show you what this buys me. Here's the before, and here's the after. If you could sort of tell, it's definitely smoother. There's just a lot of color noise in there, and I just sort of zapped it and have protected the fine details. So now I'm going to make a star mask because we want to sort of de-emphasize the stars. I know there's a script for this, but again, I like to do everything sort of in a more automated fashion. Make my star mask and apply it, and invert it so the stars are not protected and everything else is protected. And then you open up morphological transformation. And I like to set the amount, the strength, to about 0.32 or 0.27 or something like that, and make sure you have sort of a circular star shape with 9 elements, or 81 elements, 9 by 9. And here's after. Here's before, after. If you look on the right over here where it's darker, you can see it the most easily. Before, after. So the stars have just been de-emphasized a little bit. Okay, this is so cool. I just found this in September when I did this processing, the dark structure enhance. I kept trying to use histogram transformations and bringing the black point in to darken the dark patches, but it did not do that. You need a wavelets transformation. A histogram transformation will dim the darks of the entire image. It'll dim the entire image. You can't select just the dark patches unless you use wavelets. So under utilities, there's a script called Dark Structure Enhance, and it is amazing. Watch this. Okay, here's the before, and there's as I've zoomed in on a region with dark patches, and after. Look at that, before, after. Those dark nebulosity dust lanes just really pop out more, and they're just so much darker. Get that nice contrast. Here's a more dramatic one on the bottom left of the image, before, after. Look at that, dark as coal, nice and detailed now. And so now I'm going to sharpen some fine details with the local histogram equalization, and especially these filamentary structures on the bottom that are so well known and beautiful. And so here's the after, before, after. This one's really subtle, but I can definitely see an enhancement in the fine detail of these filamentary structures. So now I'm going to mask out all the stars. You have to make a new mask because we just ran a morphological transformation to erode them. So you want to make sure you have the new star mask that reflects their current size and brightness. And so what I want to do is mask out all the stars, because I'm going to run some curves transformations, but you don't want to bloat the stars back up. So it's a little trick I use. I don't know if everyone else does this already, but I sometimes will apply a star mask. It's okay if you don't get the really bright ones in there. I could have grabbed some of these brighter ones, but it's okay. So I'm going to adjust the luminosity and saturation curves in order to bring out more detail without messing up the stars. Here's the before and after. Look at that. So much better. And the stars stay the same size because I've masked them out. Tricky, tricky. I love it. Okay, so now we're going to make another curves adjustment with the star mask still on, just to bring out a little bit more of the brightness and color. So I did another luminosity and saturation on this, before, after. So one more curves adjustment to get rid of some of the green hues in panel 2 on the bottom left. You see it's just a little bit, it's just like a thin hue of green lingering around, and I want to zap that. So with the star mask still on, I do this curves adjustment. I also wanted to bring some of the red out. I don't like images of mine that are too just like flat in terms of the color space. There's high dynamic range in terms of luminosity. That's what people almost always are referring to when you talk about dynamic range, the intensity values, the bright and dim and the midtones. But there's also a color depth, and I wanted to have a very rich and complex color palette coming through. And so I wanted some of these clouds to have a reddish hue that just naturally come out of the intensity values from the sulfur channel that were already there. I'm just sort of bringing them out. So I did a S-curve on the red channel after bringing the greens down, and here's the before, after. So you have like the light golds and yellows in the bottom left, and you have oranges, and you have some redder hues at the top. It just sort of, in my opinion, makes it a little bit more dynamic in color space. So here's the last thing I want to do. I want to protect all of the brighter nebulosity and then de-emphasize some of the reds that remain in the dark region. But I don't know if you've ever had the same problem. When you use the range mask, you can't get the darker regions to go away without using that slider bar, those two slider bars, without removing the protection on the brighter regions. And so it's like a lose-lose situation. So binarize to the rescue. You can actually make your range mask binary. And so you see some of these, this right here you think would look good, but when you apply it and you see all the reds superposed on the image, the darker regions I want to dim down a little bit are still protected a little bit. And so that's the lose-lose situation. So if you open this range mask that you created and click binarize, boom, look at that. There's some sort of threshold that it's choosing that it doesn't let me have any control over. I don't know exactly what, but if a pixel is below a certain intensity threshold, it will drop it off to a 0. Actually, in this case, it's inverted, so it rounds it up to a 1, and the dark regions are rounded down to zeros entirely. So my bright regions of nebulosity are protected, and I have 0 mask on all the dim regions. So this is kind of tricky, and I love it. So we do that, and once that mask is applied, I want to bring the reds down a little bit, the greens down, just really slight colored curves transformations, and then brighten the luminosity a little bit. Here's the before, and here's after. Before, after. It's just a little bit darker where it's dark and there's not as much red and blue. That red especially looked kind of pesky to me. I didn't like that mottled red hue in the deep space. I wanted to have that darkness of deep space. And there's some really dim oxygen that is actually there. That's not a gradient. That's a real signal. It's just super dim. So I let it be. And then I do some denoising, TGV denoise. And something that a lot of people don't talk about is that areas of lower SNR should be denoised separately from the brighter regions, because in the areas of low signal, they necessarily have lower SNR. For a given, think of the noise component as just a constant throughout the whole image. Well, your SNR ratio is now lower for regions where the signal is lower. You hold the noise constant and you decrease the signal, your SNR just went down, so it looks noisier. But your brighter regions with the same absolute noise component but with much higher signal necessarily has a higher SNR ratio, so it looks cleaner. You don't want to denoise regions that have high SNR, because then you're going to end up losing all that delicious nebulosity detail you work so hard to get with deconvolution and local histogram equalization and all this stuff. So here is what happens when I denoised it, and it's really subtle, and the darker regions have been denoised and the brighter regions have been protected. And now we're just on a joyride. We're pretty much done. I want to show you some interesting features. The bottom left with the butterfly nebula and that nice tower of gas with its sharp, fine filamentary structures, and off to the right there are these nice fan-like features and a sort of spine. Really neat stuff there. Up here I've sort of zoomed in on another similar feature with a fan-like feature, and then this sort of serpentine shaped dark cloud of dust superposed on the background gas. absolutely brilliant. And then, of course, the obligatory image of the Crescent Nebula over here on the bottom right, with some of the nebulosity hanging up above it. And as I alluded to earlier, here is a separately processed, but none of those details are shown here. That would take forever. I just did a quick HOO composition and focused mostly on the Crescent Nebula itself, and you can see its characteristic ghostly blue sheath delicately perched upon the perforated filaments of the underlying expanding hydrogen cloud. There's a small poetic sort of tendency in me. I like to be very descriptive verbally. And so here's the whole image. It's sort of meh. I like it, but SHO is better. And NASA came up with that color mapping scheme with the Hubble campaign in order to see finer detail more readily in full color pictures. And boy, were they right about that. A lot of stuff that I know is here I can't even see. Even though I know it's there, it's a bit rough on the eye, but still very pleasing. You know, it's still mostly hydrogen and hydrogen alpha with that 656 nanometer atomic emission line is gonna overwhelm the images if you don't do a different color mapping and get something like this, which is my final image. Almost, except I want to show you this denoising AI by Topaz Labs. And it's made for any photography. It's actually designed for just regular terrestrial photography. If you take a picture of a bird here, or like a birthday cake, or whatever, it's you could use it for that. And it has this really addictive feature that's really fun to play with. This vertical bar in the middle. You can drag it after it's computed the preview box. It shows you the left-hand side is the before, the right-hand side is the after, and you could swipe this vertical bar left and right, and just sort of, it's really addicting. I sometimes just sit there and move this bar left and right because you get this. So look very carefully at this inverted column here with these really tenuous filaments. Watch what happens after the denoising. Look at that. It's just so much sharper. So it uses machine learning to get rid of noise and preserve and even sharpen real signal detail. Before, after, before. I love it. It's a lot of fun, and it's well worth the money. I think it was on sale a couple months ago, and I saved $20. It's only like 50 or 60 bucks, and it's well worth it. It's a game changer. So here's the final image. This is my last slide, the grand finale project or product after all that stuff. Over 60 hours integration time, 3 months for data acquisition, a whole week just to process the data. Usually I can knock it out in the afternoon, not with a 4-panel mosaic. It took me a week. More than 2 days just to compile the presentation. And I would like to give a shout out and a very special thank you to Randy Lindstrom for his help and feedback with this presentation, and for continuing our sort of collaborative efforts together that we started back in the spring. And so I want to thank you all for coming here and listening to me talk about how I process this beast of an image. Clear skies to all of you. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions and comments at this time.